Hello and welcome to ThinkStep's webinar on planning ahead for your recycling compliance in India and Canada in order to protect product sales. My name is Lisa Dean and I'm the head of global compliance team at ThinkStep Compliance Limited, and I'm joined today by my colleague James Pearson, who is the EC4P product manager. In today's webinar, we will provide a brief introduction to our company, take a look at how regulations are changing globally, then move on to look at specific case studies of new regulations in India and Canada, before explaining how we can help you achieve WEEE batteries and packaging compliance at a global level. We'll finish the webinar with a demonstration of our web-based registration and reporting platform, EC4P, before answering any questions you may have. So to introduce you to our company, ThinkStep is a global sustainability software company. More than 2,000 companies in 20 different industry sectors rely on ThinkStep sustainability software solutions. For example, ThinkStep provides the leading lifecycle assessment software, Garby, which has 20,000 users in more than 20 different industry sectors. 40% of the global Fortune 500, such as Hewlett-Packard, Interface, Siemens, Unilever, and Volkswagen, rely on ThinkStep. The EC4P platform is part of ThinkStep. Other software solutions provided by ThinkStep include our Substance Declarations database BombCheck, our product lifecycle software Garby, and our enterprise sustainability solution Sophie. ThinkStep's modular solutions for product compliance management integrate with Siemens product lifecycle management software Teamcenter to enable design for compliance across the entire product lifecycle. Siemens Teamcenter is the world's most widely used PLM system. Managing compliance within Teamcenter enables companies to integrate environmental data with their product data at each phase of the product development process, while at the same time leveraging key PLM capabilities. So this integrated approach within Siemens Teamcenter leads right through to the product end of life and compliance management with global WEEE batteries and packaging recycling using ThinkStep's EC4P platform. To provide you with a brief introduction of ThinkStep's industry background, we have extensive experience in WEEE batteries packaging, RoHS and REACH. For example, in 2003, we wrote the UK government guidelines on the RoHS and WEEE directives to explain practical compliance requirements to UK companies. And in 2007, we were the first organisation to gain authorisation to operate a UK government-approved WEEE compliance scheme, B2B WEEE scheme. We launched our global WEEE batteries and packaging services in 2013, and we've carried out these global services for a number of clients to date. And in 2014, our web-based registration and reporting platform, EC4P, was established, which James will provide more detail on later in the webinar. So to take a look at global product recycling regulations, each year the number of product recycling regulations across the world increases, and these product recycling regulations are also subject to revisions which can change the obligations placed on producers. So this map shows some of the e-waste regulations that have come into force or have been amended in the last few months alone. And in this webinar, we'll be taking a look at the amended e-waste management rules of India, the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act of Ontario, and the Electronic Equipment Stewardship Regulations of Saskatchewan. In addition to these e-waste regulations, of course, batteries and packaging recycling regulations must also be monitored at a global level, as these are also increasing in number. So just to highlight some of the challenges producers must overcome in order to achieve product recycling compliance in the country. First of all, product recycling regulations need to be identified, be it existing legislation, amended legislation, or new legislation which has recently come into force. The next stage is then to determine whether you're obligated as a producer based on your sales arrangements and whether any of your products you place on the market actually fall in scope of the regulations. And if you're obligated under the regulations, compliance arrangements must then be put in place, and this can include registration, financing, collection and recycling arrangements, reporting sales data, and meeting substance requirements. So in short, the process of trying to monitor and manage global product compliance internally can be time-consuming and costly, and if adequate compliance arrangements aren't in place in a country, this can halt sales of products. James will explain later on how ThinkStep's managed service can help you achieve ongoing compliance. As part of these services, we offer a quarterly update to help you keep track of new regulations and any changes to existing regulations and how these will affect you. So to take a look at the e-waste regulations in India, there's been a lot of change to the e-waste rules in India in the recent years. And on the 22nd of March 2018, the e-waste management amendment rules were published in the Indian Official Gazette, and they came into force on the same day. These rules amend the e-waste management rules of 2016. The main obligations placed on producers remain the same as per the e-waste management rules 2016, and these include collection of e-waste, financing the management of e-waste, creating consumer awareness, obtaining EPR Authorisation from the Central Pollution Control Board, maintaining records, and annual reporting. So the main changes have been to the collection targets in Schedule 3 of the rules, which have been reduced under the amendment rules. The revised extended producer responsibility targets are applicable from the 1st of October 2017. Any volumes of e-waste previously collected by producers will be taken into account and offset against the targets. So as you can see from the listed collection targets, they gradually increase by 10% each year. And by 2023, collection targets will reach 70% of the quantity of e-waste generation. So just to remind you, the collection targets for each producer is calculated by estimating the e-waste generated by a producer based on the quantity of e-placed on the market in previous years, and also taking into consideration the average life of the equipment. Lower collection targets have been introduced for new producers who have started their sales recently in India. In the guidelines issued by the Central Pollution Control Board, a new producer is defined as a company whose number of years of sales operations is less than the average life of their products. By 2025, collection targets for new producers reach 20% of the sales figure of the year preceding the previous year. So the collection targets for new producers are calculated slightly differently in that they are based on the sales data of products placed on the market 2 years previous, rather than taking into account the average life of the equipment. Another change under the amendment rules is with regards to the ROS provisions. The Central Pollution Control Board may carry out random sampling of electrical and electronic equipment placed on the market in order to monitor and verify the compliance of ROS provisions. The cost of this sampling and testing will be met by the government. However, where the product is found to be non-compliant with the ROS provisions, the cost of the ROS test is to be met by the producer. The producer will also be required to take corrective measures to bring the product into compliance with RoHS and also withdraw or recall the product from the market. And a third change that producers should be aware of is that the amended rules introduces producer responsibility organisations registration requirement with the Central Pollution Control Board, that they're required to do this in order to operate as a producer responsibility organisation in India. So it's possible for a producer to comply individually by setting up arrangements with authorised recyclers, but if a producer chooses to comply through a producer responsibility organisation, the producer must now ensure that that producer responsibility organisation is authorised. It's important to note that entities importing products into India using their own importer-exporter code will not be allowed to do so without EPR authorisation from the Central Pollution Control Board. Under Article 13 of the e-waste management rules, it states that on receipt of a complete application, the Central Pollution Control Board will carry out evaluation of the application, and on being satisfied that the producer has detailed out an effective system to manage extended producer responsibility in the country, shall grant EPR authorisation within a period of 120 days. And this EPR authorisation will be valid for a period of 5 years. So producers need to be mindful of the length of time the application can actually take, and this can actually be longer than the 120 days specified if the Central Pollution Control Board considers the application to be incomplete. As mentioned on the previous slide, without EPR authorisation, a company cannot import products into India using their own importer-exporter code, and this can potentially delay sales in India. So if you're selling via a distributor and this distributor uses their own importer-exporter code to import your products, then the distributor must have EPR authorisation. Under Article 21 of the rules, liable parties such as manufacturers, producers and importers are held responsible for any damage to the environment or third parties due to the mishandling of e-waste, and further must pay penalties for any violations. And as previously mentioned, where the product is found to be non-compliant with RoHS provisions, the cost of the RoHS test is to be met by the producer, and the producer is also required to take corrective measures to bring the product into compliance and also withdraw or recall the product from the market. And on to the e-waste regulations in Ontario and Saskatchewan in Canada. So in 2016, Ontario published the Waste Free Ontario Act, which comprises of the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act and the Waste Diversion Transition Act. The purpose of this legislation is to increase resource recovery and move towards a circular economy in Ontario. The Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act defines liable parties to include brand holders. So previously, stewards were stated as the obligated party. A brand holder is defined as a person who owns or licenses a brand or who otherwise has rights to market a product under the brand. And under this Act, marketing includes leasing of products. The Act also defines a commercial connection, which I've listed at the bottom of this slide. As you can see, this is an entity who imports, wholesales, leases or retails the product. Now, a commercial connection may also be required to carry out responsibilities instead of or in addition to the brand holder. Under the current regulations in Ontario, stewards are only required to report sales data and pay an environmental fee, whereas under the new Act, brand holders will be subject to extended producer responsibility obligations. So these will include registration, waste reduction, collection, promotion and education, reporting and record keeping. Brand holders will be able to meet the requirements individually or by joining an approved producer responsibility organisation. On the 8th of February of this year, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change issued directions under the Waste Diversion Transition Act to the current e-waste programme Ontario Electronic Stewardship to wind up the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment programme by the 30th of June 2020. Producer responsibility organisations will be introduced to replace Ontario Electronic Stewardship, and this will allow the transition to individual producer responsibility under the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act. It's worth noting that the government is looking to designate new materials under the producer responsibility regulations, including additional WEEE materials from 2018. In order to protect product sales in Ontario, producers will be required to change their existing compliance arrangements by the 1st of July 2020. Producers who decide to meet new requirements through a producer responsibility organisation should identify an authorised producer responsibility organisation which is registered with the authorities in Ontario. In addition, producers should monitor which products fall into scope of the regulations in Ontario, as the government is looking to add products to the scope from this year onwards. In Saskatchewan, the Electronic Equipment Stewardship Regulations came into force at the beginning of this month. So the regulations expand the scope of equipment covered to include more computer peripherals, such as external hard drives and keypads, floor standing printers, multifunction devices, fax machines and portable scanners are now also in scope. And additional consumer electronics now fall in scope, such as e-book readers, GPS devices, handheld video games and microwave ovens. Annual reporting deadlines have been revised under the amended regulations. The annual reporting period now actually follows the calendar year of the 1st of January to the 31st of December, rather than the financial year of the 1st of April to the 31st of March. The annual reports are now to be submitted by the 30th of June, and this deadline was previously the 31st of July. Producers should assess whether any of their product range falls into the new scope of Saskatchewan's electronic equipment stewardship regulations in order to remain compliant and protect product sales in this province. I'm now going to hand you over to James, our EC4P product manager, who can provide some information about our compliance consultancy and software services, which we've been providing to companies for well over 10 years at an EU level and for over 3 years at a global level. James will also be able to give you a demonstration of EC4P's web-based registration and reporting platform.
Okay, thanks Lisa for the introduction and for the first half of today's webinar, which really had a lot of useful information about the current and emerging and ongoing or e-waste legislation in India and Canada. So to follow on from Lisa's information, I'll be running the second half of today's webinar, which will consist of a demo of the EC4P system. But before switching over to the browser and starting the demo, I'd just like to quickly run through some slides which give a high-level overview of our services and EC4P before we get stuck into the software functionality. So the first thing that I'd like to run through is a typical compliance timeline, which companies go through or should go through when assessing their e-waste as well as batteries and packaging compliance obligations, and when implementing any compliance arrangements where needed. So first off, you need to assess whether any product compliance legislation for e-waste or batteries and packaging has been implemented in the countries or states or member states which you're selling products in. The more countries you're selling in, obviously this makes an increasingly complex task. The second point is that in countries where there is legislation in place, you need to assess whether your products are actually in scope of that legislation. So, for example, do the regulations stipulate between consumer and professional use products? What are the e-waste categories, if any? Are different types of batteries regulated differently in different countries? Those sorts of questions you need to start asking at this point. If your products are in scope, then you need to determine if and what your options to actually implement compliance arrangements are. In some countries and states, there's quite a large variety of options. So if you have to join a compliance scheme, which of the available schemes is the right one for your products and your sales arrangements? And actually, which will be the most cost-effective option, considering all the options that are on the table for you. When you have put in place an authority or compliance scheme registration, you need to calculate your obligation based on the amounts of products shipped, either by weight or quantity, or often both, or in terms of packaging, it's broken down by packaging fractions. And then in addition to calculating this obligation based on amount of products shipped, you might need to implement and make available a waste or recycling program plan, as is required in many countries outside of Europe. You'll then need to ensure that you stay on top of compliance data reporting moving into the future, and also you need to track any changes to the legislation in every country and make sure that the associated adjustments are implemented to ensure you stay compliant. So there's quite a lot to do to ensure a robust compliance program is in place, and EC4P can actually help companies through this in two main ways. So if the answer to the first three questions is no, then EC4P can actually monitor the regulations for you and notify you of any applicable changes in legislation which might bring your activities or products into scope, and we can do this via our quarterly update reports. The second, and really the main way which we can help, is to actually manage the compliance assessment and the implementation process on your behalf. And over the next few slides, I hope to show you why we're fairly uniquely equipped to help in this area. So the main overall benefit that EC4P can bring is to give companies an easier way to take control of product compliance with a centralized approach. And the first aspect in delivering this approach is EC4P's team of expert compliance consultants. Now, our team of consultants can very quickly and accurately assess companies' obligations. As we've seen, this is or can be dependent on sales arrangements and the types of products which you're selling into different countries. We can then provide cost-effective registration and reporting solutions, including a cost comparison and recommendation of the best registration options considering your products and your sales arrangements. We can also identify any schemes that are open to unique requirements you might have, such as overseas sales or specific industry product types. We can then manage memberships to schemes going forwards, including the submission of all documentation and forms on your behalf where possible. EC4P can also optionally pay recycling fees in each country on behalf of its customers and pass through those invoices at cost. Now, the benefit that some of our clients find from this is that you only have to set up one supplier account with EC4P rather than separate supplier accounts for the vast array of different compliance schemes and organizations you need to have memberships with to implement a robust compliance program. Our consultants can then also monitor laws and regulations in any given country and notify you of changes which are applicable to your company and applicable to your products when they arise. Now, the second aspect in delivering this centralized approach is the EC4P software platform. This platform provides a registration and data reporting summary through the dashboards, which I'll demo when I log into the demo account. This includes a repository of all relevant documentation and contracts that you have in regards to product compliance. It displays all upcoming reporting deadlines, which are specific to your company. And considering many of these deadlines have different reporting periods and different deadline dates, this can actually be seen as a really valuable management tool, again, as I hope to show during the demo. EC4P will actually then chase users to enter data by sending them email notifications as each of their deadlines approaches. It will check that the data is entered in the correct format for that particular compliance scheme and in accordance with the local country regulations in each instance. And EC4P will then issue compliance certificates on an annual basis, one each for e-waste and batteries and packaging. And these compliance certificates list the countries and the associated regulations a company has maintained compliance with using EC4P. And this, we have found, is a very efficient way for companies to communicate their compliance with the likes of authorities or to auditors in the audit process, as well as customers who may ask for evidence of your product compliance. Okay, so now that we've got a bit of background about our services and an overview of the software system, I'll move on to the demo itself. To be able to effectively demo the software, we've set up a demo account for a company called Acme Electronics, and this can be thought of as an electronics manufacturer who are selling products into many countries around the world, including India and Canada, and who are using EC4P to achieve compliance in those countries.